Hello, everyone who's joining us, and thank you for joining us today for our Chiltern Branch weekly summer school series, Back to Basics. This is our 6th in the series, so again, I want to welcome you all. And we have a special event today as well, in that this is in collaboration with the East Anglia Branch. Today's topic is on chemical safety. And we're, as you know, as we said in the promotion, you're getting 2 for 1. So we have 2 presenters today. First, we'll hear from Dermot Dinan from EcoOnline. And then we will hear from Kane Bliss Appleton on DSEAR. So again, we want to thank the East Anglia Branch for collaborating with us at Chiltern for this event. It is one of the benefits of this virtual world that we're able to come together where distances might have been. I would first like to introduce Dermot Dinan of EcoOnline, who will be speaking around the fundamentals around safety data sheets. So Dermot is the EcoOnline Solutions Manager for Ireland and UK. And he has more than 15 years experience in developing and deploying health and safety systems in a wide range of industries, including healthcare, pharmaceuticals, food industries. So we want to say thanks again for Dermot coming in. One of the things about these weekly summer school series, we've been calling them bite-sized presentations, because unlike our normal sessions, they are only 45 minutes in total for the topic or the presenter. But I just want to remind persons, as we had shared in the registration for this event, there's an excellent webinar that Dermot and his colleague had done earlier this year for IOSH magazine on chemical legislations, the changes that were coming up this year, particularly for the UK. We'll pop the link for that in the chat. Highly recommend it if you haven't seen it as yet. So with that in mind, I would like to welcome Dermot, and if you can share your slides.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here today. I'm just going to share my screen here with you now. So, so back to basics, safety data sheets and chemical safety management. I'm just going to start off, give it a brief introduction to myself, because it kind of feeds into maybe what I'm going to talk about as well. So to give you my background, my own background, so I have to start off with, like, I am not a health and safety specialist. I'm not a chemical safety specialist. I'm not the person who can tell you you should use this type of glove with that type of product, etc., etc. I'm a systems person. And what I'm going to talk about today is very much based on that, and I'll get to that in a second. So, like, I founded a company with my colleague back in 2004 called DCM. Essentially, we were chemical safety specialists. I came in on the software side. We were acquired then by EcoOnline in 2018. So, like, I've been 17 years working in chemical safety. And particularly in chemical safety management systems. And anything I talk about is not, necessarily something that has come out of my head. It's based on traveling around the UK, primarily the UK, different parts of Europe and the US, but primarily the UK over that period, and seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly of chemical management systems. In particular, for this series, for the Back to Basics series, I think chemical safety is a really, really great fit. Because I think I understand, like, why it's coming out of, hopefully we're coming out the right side of COVID now. That's maybe why we're looking at back to basics. But even apart from that, I believe that chemical safety needs to be brought back to basics in an awful lot of places anyway. Because I go into so many organizations where I see, for example, maybe there's a very good industrial hygiene monitoring plan, but their safe data sheets are out of date, or they have, a really detailed COSH assessment template. They spend a couple of hours doing assessments, but they don't have an up-to-date chemical inventory of what chemicals they actually have. So I always recommend, whether you're using our software or whether you're using an Excel file, chemical safety has to start with the basics. And the vast majority of organizations that I go into, that's where they need to go. They need to go right back to the basics to get it working right. So like I said in the title, we're going to talk about safe data sheets. Really, we're going to talk about is, what is an SDS? I'm going to talk briefly about cost assessments, and I'll explain why. And it's just really because of the confusion around them at times. But I'm going to talk about, what do we do before we go get our SDS, and what are the initial things we need to do once we do go and get the SDS for the products that we have. So I'm going to start off, as I said, this is back to basics, and a lot of this will be very basic. It's particularly for the people that are on this. So like, I'm talking here to health and safety professionals. But what I think is very important to take from this is that you may look at this, a lot of this, and you may say, that's, I understand that, of course I know that. But it's very important to take this because the people that you're working with, your staff, your colleagues, etc., this is the kind of stuff that they don't know. And this is the kind of stuff that causes them a lot of confusion. So, an SDS is a 16-section document that outlines, essentially the safety data, a lot of different safety data in relation to individual chemicals. This is a very important point. It is a unique document. It's required by law, but it's unique to every product manufactured. Sorry, it's unique to every individual product from every individual manufacturer. And it's quite a basic point, but it's one that's missed so much. So, for example, if I have Pepsi Cola, then I need to have the safe data sheet for Pepsi Cola, not Coca-Cola, not Tesco brand cola. I need to have the SDS for Tesco for Pepsi Cola. And even looking at this is Pepsi Max. I don't want Pepsi low fat. So you have to have the SDS for the actual product you have. And again, that sounds like a very simple thing to say. Why do I say it? Because I see so many places where that's missed out on. You get a generic SDS. So you must have the SDS for the product that you have. And essentially, chemical users, there's a lot of information in an SDS, and chemical users it's not good enough to just have the SDS. You can use the information in that to learn, how can I use this product more safely in my organization? And it's our starting point for that. Just a small note that it is worth noting. So the SDS that you use in the UK right now, it is produced. I'll jump back a bit. The regulation that you're following in the UK is now UK REACH since Brexit. Although UK format ones are still accepted. To most people, it will still look the exact same, because both UK REACH and EU REACH and US and the vast majority of territories worldwide follow the GHS standard. And to most people then, the SDS will still look the very same. It's the same pictograms, hazard statements, precautionary statements, and where you'll see slight differences within the UK is maybe in section 2, it'll reference a UK law instead of an EU one. EU ones are still accepted. And the webinar that Melissa mentioned there, that she's going to pop into the chat, we go into that in a bit more detail. To the end user, the SDS will still look pretty much the same. And essentially, your starting point is the SDS should be available where chemicals are in use. There are other things we have to do. We have to push onto our cost estimates, etc., which we'll talk about. But the starting point is, as an employer, you have to have the SDS available for all the products that you have on site. So that's essentially what an SDS is. One point that I will make just about an SDS, as I said, I've been in this business about 17 years. SDS's safe data sheets, they're getting longer and longer. So, when I started doing this first, it wasn't unusual to find, a typical SDS would be maybe 2-3 pages long. Now, your average SDS would be 7 or 8 pages, and it's not unusual to find them with 20 plus pages. And that's a good thing, because the SDS that was 2 pages 17 years ago had NA, 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 NA in every section. Whereas now, as a manufacturer, you just don't get away with it. So there's an awful lot of information on an SDS. The slight negative of that is that as your average end user, that can become a bit more challenging then to pull out the critical information for an end user. So like, where's my first aid? What do I need to do in a fire? That might be halfway down section 4. So it is just something to be conscious of, that SDSs, as they've got longer, have got a little bit more difficult to use, for your average end user. And it's why I would say the COSH assessment is more important than ever it was, because we need to take out that what's critical to my end users. So just briefly then around the COSH regulations, and I'll explain the reason for this when I get in, of why am I talking about COSH at all, because I hadn't pushed on to that. So essentially, COSH, control of substances hazardous health. It's a UK regulation. That's a very important point on COSH. It's a UK regulation, so obviously it's not going to change with regard to Brexit, etc. There are similar regulations in other territories throughout Europe, etc. But a lot of them, most of these people will recognise the term COSH, or a lot of countries recognise the term COSH, and in a lot of not a lot of countries, in a lot of companies outside of the UK, it's often the COSH regulations are often taken as best practice as well. So COSH regulations are specific UK regulations. They are also specifically just around health. So the COSH regulations are around around using chemicals where they and not allowing to damage people's health in the workplace. Part of the COSH regulations, and it is not the entire COSH regulations, is the need to write a COSH assessment. And this is, I suppose, the reason that I'm talking about COSH at all in this is just that because a COSH assessment and a safe data sheet are the two most commonly mixed up documents that you will find in chemical safety. And again, I'm saying it to you guys will understand this, but you guys have to be aware that your staff very often won't. Your colleagues, when they're talking, and I'll get on to the next slide, the kind of mistakes that they make, they will make these mistakes. So what is a COSH assessment? So the COSH assessment is that when I'm using this Pepsi Max here in my company, I need to look at the hazardous information on the SDS and the information that's in there. I look at how I'm using it, the quantities I'm using, the environment, the people that are exposed to it, etc. And I make some decisions on how can we use this safely here. Are we happy with controls in place? Do we need to put better controls in place, etc.? What do we need to do? And the assessment then is essentially the documentation of that process. I'm looking at how we use it. Can we use it any safer? And documenting that process. But it is specific to how I use this here. So the COSH assessment that I write for my Pepsi here in the office is different than the COSH assessment we're going to write for someone who's drinking Pepsi in a maternity hospital beside maybe gas, etc. It is specific to how we use it here in our environment. There's no standard format for a COSH assessment. So a safety data sheet, 16 sections, absolutely written in stone down to subsection level. You can't decide with a safe data sheet, I'm going to put first aid in section 5 because that's where I like it. No, first aid goes in section 4. That's it. A COSH assessment, you could write it as an essay. You could write it in a structured format. There are certain boxes that you have to tick, but it's not a very structured document like a safe data sheet is. The last thing I'd say then on a COSH assessment is, like, if you were to be really pedantic about a COSH assessment, specifically a COSH assessment needs to cover the COSH regulations. So essentially looks at what are the health risks of this chemical and how can we control those. But the term COSH assessment, and I don't know if you guys can see me there, I'm using the old air quotes, but the term COSH assessment, people generally take it as it's a risk assessment of how we use a chemical. And they usually go above and beyond COSH where they look at fire risk within it as well. That we often look at environmental risk. So it's essentially, it's a risk assessment of how we use a chemical that covers COSH, but will also cover environment, covers fire as well, and other bits and pieces. So usually a COSH assessment will end up covering more than COSH as well. So, but the main point about a COSH assessment is it is how we use this chemical here, and it's produced locally on site. So the reason that I've gone through, what is an SDS, what is a COSH assessment, is because of this. What are the common mistakes then that you're going to meet out when you go talking to your staff, etc.? So incorrect terms. MSDS. MSDS is not a correct term in Europe, in the UK, and it's not a correct term in the US anymore. It used to be in the US, it's not a correct term anymore. But it's one of those terms like calling a vacuum cleaner a Hoover, that is so commonly used that you kind of pretty much have to let it slide. But it does cause a bit of confusion where some people will ask, you know, what's the difference between an MSDS and an SDS? MSDS stands for Material Safe Data Sheet. SDS stands for Safe Data Sheet. MSDS is just basically an older term for the same document, but it is the same document. And it is an incorrect term, but you kind of got to let it slide. But it does cause confusion. You'll also then hear a lot of incorrect terms, or people will come up with a mishmash of chemical safety sheets, COSH data sheets, etc. And again, I think it's very important when you're talking to your staff and your colleagues that you use the correct terms and don't pick up on these, because and that's a lot of that's coming from, again, the lack of understanding. What is a COSH assessment? What is a safe data sheet? It's coming from the feeling that I know there's documents I need to have around my chemicals, or I'm not really sure what they are, and they're mishmashing the terms together. So MSDS, chemical safety sheets, COSH data sheets, it's important that you, as a safety professional, you understand the correct term, and that's what you say to your staff. And when you get these terms back, that you clarify, okay, do you mean the safe data sheet or do you mean the COSH assessment, and you're clear with them on it. Download a COSH assessment. I picked that as just one term. Essentially, what I'm trying to cover here is the lack of understanding of what a COSH assessment is, and it's probably maybe the most common mistake I find with chemical safety in the UK. And this is, you know, down to staff level, where there's a belief that a COSH assessment is, first of all, that the term I use there, download a COSH assessment, that I can go to the manufacturer's website and I can just download the COSH assessment. I can get a bit of software that will automatically create a COSH assessment for me. It might maybe go through COSH Essentials and get me some scoring, but it's not creating a full COSH assessment for me, where I'm actually putting in locally what are the controls I want to put in place, etc. Another common mistake is copy and paste. So essentially on the COSH, with the COSH assessment, that a COSH assessment is just a subset of your safe data sheet. Your copy and paste your maybe first aid, you copy and paste your fire from the SDS into another document, and that's just an absolute waste of your time. Absolute waste of your time. What should your fire information tell you on your COSH assessment? It should tell you, if I have a fire in my organization around this chemical, what do I do? Like spill cleanup is one of my bugbears, because what you often see in a COSH assessment is, because it's been copied and pasted from an SDS, is clean up in accordance with local regulations. That is absolutely no good when I've spilled this and it's going towards the drain, and I now need to make a decision, and this is telling me clean up in accordance with local regulations. It's too late now to find out what the local regulations are. My COSH assessment should tell me, use the spill kit in the blue wheelie bin that is down beside the shipping area. Contact Bob on extension 1234. So your COSH assessment should tell you, what do you do here in your organization? And the last common mistake I put in there, and this is one that I do get from some safety professionals as well, and that is that essentially the whole kind of chemical safety management only needs to be done for your hazardous products. And that includes getting the safe data sheets. But, you know, which is, it's obviously, it's utterly daft, because the first point, how do you go to find out what is hazardous? You check the safe data sheet. Whereas if I'm saying I'm only getting them from my hazardous products, I'm deciding from the very start, I know what is hazardous. These are the 15 products that are hazardous, so they're the only ones I'm going to manage. What I always say about that is, if you know they're hazardous, particularly if they're, you know, for example, in the manufacturing area, if you know they're hazardous, chances are everyone else knows they're hazardous as well, and they're treating them accordingly. But it's the hidden chemicals, it's the other stuff that you need to get to see. And the only way to do it is you get your full inventory and you manage everything. You get your safe data sheets for everything, which I'm going to push on to. So that's why I just wanted to start off with, okay, what is an SDS? What is a COSH assessment? So before I get my safe data sheets at all, and again, I know this is back to basics, and this is, and it's very much around systems I'm talking about here. So what is the very first thing you do? First of all, document your structure. What I mean by that is, what are my departments? So let's say we're a hotel. You literally just write down what departments we've got. Okay, we got cleaning, we've got the pool and spa, we've got the restaurant, etc. Why I'm saying that is, don't assume you know where the chemicals are. So when I say document your structure, I don't mean write down where all your chemicals are. No, I mean write down what your departments are. And then you go to someone in those departments and you ask them what chemicals you have. So don't you assume, so okay, I know there's some in manufacturing, I know there's some in maintenance, so just those two. No, go to the admin, put down admin and put someone there in charge for it. And that's the second point there. And it's easy for me to say, and this is probably across all health and safety, that getting people to take part and getting people's input instead of you doing it yourself is ideal. I would say at the very, very least you want to get to these departments is that someone is going to do the inventory for you down there. You should not be going down to the pool, the canteen, etc., writing out the list of chemicals for them. They need to take ownership of that themselves. I know that's very easy for me to say here, but in an ideal world, that's what you need to do. Even if they do nothing else, they don't write cost assessment, they don't get the SDS, they at the very least need to take control of, I'm going to manage, this is the list of chemicals that I have. So document your structure, come up, these are the list of departments / areas I have, and this is the chap, girl, guys, team that are going to be in charge of, they're going to be the champions in there. They may not have to do a massive amount of work, but they're going to be in charge of at least managing the inventory there. Before then we go getting your inventory, I would say just design a simple, consistent template to use across the organization. So let's say we have 5 departments and I have 5 team members that are going to build that inventory for me in their own department. Rather than just saying, Melissa, can you get me the chemicals from your department, please? And Melissa sends me an Excel file with 17 columns all filled in, and she's done way more work than I need. And then I go to Bob in his department and he writes down one word, paint, oil, diesel, and he writes it on a page and puts it in my pigeonhole down in reception. Give them a simple template. What you need is your full product name, the manufacturer, as opposed to the supplier, if possible, and the product code. What I mean by product code is important for particularly laboratory products, technical products. So if I'd like to be with laboratory stuff, if I go to Sigma, for example, to get an SDS, I'm going to need what is the product code that I need. It's not enough to say that I have, if I go to Sigma and look for an acetone SDS, they'll have probably 200 different grades, quality, etc. of acetone. So I need the product code is the unique identifier for it. So design is template. Again, the reason for designing that template is because we want to collate this together afterwards. So if I don't give them a template to use, they're going to go off to do their own thing, and I'm going to spend a day then messing around trying to pull all that together. Give them all a template so they can fill it in, and I can bring it back and I can put it all together once it's done in a consistent format. Finally then, the people that are going out doing this, give them a small bit of training. Don't just go to Bob and say, give me the list of chemicals you have. You know, first of all, explain why this is so important. What is a chemical and what should be included? You know, products that are, you know, in storage as well as in use. So, okay, we have Pepsi here. It's up on the shelf. We haven't used it in 2 years, so I'm not going to put that on. If it's in your department, you either get rid of it or you put it on the inventory, even if you're not using it. Look at has as well as non-has. As I touched on already, a common mistake I get is you go out, you ask for chemicals, and they tell you the 5 ones that they know that are hazardous, and they leave out the 10 that they think are non-hazardous. But how do you know if you haven't checked the SDS? So this is all in preparation for getting your full inventory together. You then need to go out, you need to get your safe data sheets. Again, this seems quite simple. First of all, do it centrally. Why would I do it centrally instead of maybe getting departments to get their own SDS? You're cutting back on the duplication of work. You're going to have products that go across departments, but you're always going to have manufacturers that go across departments. And most of the work in getting safe data sheets is, where do I get the safe data sheets for this particular manufacturer? So if I'm going getting Sigma safe data sheets, for example, and Sigma ones are easy to get, they have a good website. So I might spend maybe 10 minutes figuring out where to get them. Maybe I have to log on to the website, so I have to apply for username, etc. And that might take a bit of time. Once I get in there to where the safe data sheets are, it's as easy to get one SDS as it is to get 10. So if you collate it centrally, if you're getting a few people to do it, rather than them giving it out by department, give it out by manufacturer. So you say that, okay, instead of me doing 2 departments and you do 2 departments, you say, well, I'll do all manufacturers from A to N, and you do the rest of the manufacturers, etc. Because most of the work is figuring out, where do I get it by this manufacturer? And based on that, source directly as much as possible from the manufacturer. Don't rely. So if I go to my supplier to get an SDS, they may have not updated that from the manufacturer for 4 or 5 years. They may have kept that on the shelf and they're giving me an old one. So if I'm buying maybe WD-40 from a supplier, rather than going and getting the WD-40 supplier from the SDS, go directly to the WD-40 website and get the most up-to-date one from the manufacturer. And when you're starting out, just acknowledge the fact, and look, we've a lot of experience in managing SDSs. It's what we started the business out, or started the software side of the business out in the first place. That, you know, and it's where I see this falling down for people to do it themselves, is that they don't acknowledge from the start that it's going to have to take a couple of passes to get the SDSs for some. What I mean by that is, so let's say we have 100 products, and I sit down today and going through them one by one, sort by manufacturer. The first time going through them, I'm going to get maybe about 70% of them. But the next ones, then I'm going to have to contact them again, recontact them maybe the following week, recontact them the following week again. So like maybe, for example, the first 70%, I go on, I look, there's a website there, I can get them straight away. Then maybe there's some then where I have to maybe ring the manufacturer. They say, oh, I'll ring you back tomorrow, or email them on. They don't get back to you. You need to touch base on them again in a week's time. They maybe promise to send out a username, etc. So when you're setting out to manage to get your safe data sheets, acknowledge from the start that you're going to have to go back to these a few times and build that into your system. Say, okay, I'm going to spend 2 days this week, and I'm going to put away then 2 hours next Monday to do my second pass, and I'm going to put 2 hours the following Monday to do my third pass through them, and build that in from the start, because you're going to have to go back to some of them a couple of times before you finally get there. And finally, then, it's just a smaller tip that we built into our own systems internally, is when you do get an STS from a manufacturer, record, where did I get that? Because as I said, most of the work is getting an STS is, where do I get it from this manufacturer? So if I have to get something else from this manufacturer, I don't have to figure all that out again, because it's in my Excel file or whatever system I'm using to get it. It's all in there. Or in a year's time, when I want to check, is this still the most up-to-date one? I can pop on there and I can see where to get it last year, and I can follow the same instructions. So, you know, again, it doesn't have to be a paragraph. Just say, oh, this is the email address, this chap will help you out, or this is the login to the website. Put that in there so it doesn't have to be figured out by the next person that has to go there. So we've got our inventory now. We've reached out, we've got our safe data sheets. So what's the first thing that we do with our safe data sheets? And again, this is very basic, but the reason I put it in is that I see so much people, you know, they're going getting their safe data sheets, maybe 100 products, and the next thing is they're jumping on writing their cost assessments. You start with A for acetone and work your way through them. And I'd say, okay, let's get some basic stuff done first, and I'll get that on the next slide where you know, once we have our main hazardous data together, we can fix some big problems first before we get into the nitty-gritty then of individual assessments. So the first thing is, okay, collect your basic data from your SDS. Consider your document management first. Obviously, you have the revision date of the SDS, the date that you actually got it, and eventually put in your system, because we're going to maintain this going forward, put into your again, Excel file or whatever system you're using to manage these, that when have I last checked this? So you might have a revision date of an SDS that's 3-4 years old, but you last checked it 6 months ago. So it is still the latest one that's there. So just put that into your system that you're using to manage your safe data sheets. Pull out your main hazardous information. And this is before now, you know, this is before you go into your detailed SDS for your cost assessment. This is when I just put out, okay, what's the basic information I want to put out? So you put into your section 2, and whatever way you record it. So I would always say, in an ideal world, it's what we have in our software. In an ideal world, a visual of the pictograms is great if you can get that into your system, because again, it gives you a good visual glance of what I have in my department. But if you can't do that, try and get the hazard statements in, or the hazard codes, or at the very least, identify your very high hazards. So you, let's say, maybe have 2 or 3 check boxes that you want to find out. Is it maybe a carcinogen? Is it a pregnancy hazard? Is it explosive, flammable, etc.? So that you can tick those boxes along in your initial pass. And I'll get to why we're doing this in a second. So just get a summary of your hazards, but get the balance right. You don't need to pull off your precautionary statements. You don't need to pull off the first aid information from section 4. Not at this initial pass. We'll get into that in more detail when we're pushing on to write our COSH estimates. But just you're essentially trying to draw a picture of what kind of hazards do we have in our organization. And another bit of information, and this is kind of quite new to what I'm putting in to even when I talk about this, but again, I've seen it in so many companies. The outside of the hazards in section 2, the other little bit of info that I would ideally pull in to this initial snapshot is any kind of special requirements around storage, incompatibilities, etc. from section 7. It's a good thing to have in the snapshot when we want to look at our department, but again, before we get into the nitty-gritty, to see what's in there. So, and when we have that information in, essentially try and summarize it then by kind of department/location. So essentially what you're trying to get here is, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want a snapshot of my department. So within my department here, we have corrosives, we have 1 or 2 really nasties, and we have 4 products with special storage requirements that we need to take care of. So just get a snapshot of what does each department look like from a high level. And then once you have that, and again, this is all before we're pushing on then to go into detail and write our COSH estimates. Once you have that, fix the big problems. First of all, look at your high hazards. So, and again, my point on this is, before we go writing COSH assessments for an irritant that we use as a window cleaner, fix the big problems. Look at the high hazards. Before we go writing answer, can we remove them? This is a carcinogen. Do we have to have it at all? Okay, we absolutely have to have it. It's the only thing that will do this job. Can we reduce the quantities, reduce the exposures, reduce the quantities of it, reduce the number of people that are exposed to it, etc. So deal with your high hazards first. And your first question on the high hazards has always got to be, do we have to have it here at all? Look at your general hazards by department then. So we look at a department here and we say, okay, we have 10 chemicals here in this department and 7 of them are corrosive. So in general, we're using a lot of corrosives here. Have we got the kind of the general required PPE controls, etc. for corrosives? We have a department over here, and maybe 5 of what we're using are environmental hazards and maybe dangerous, bad environmental hazards. Have we got the controls? Have we got the spill kits, etc. required for those? So get a snapshot by hazard. Sorry, get a snapshot kind of by department/area. Look at the general hazards in that area, and then look at the general controls in that area and see what have we got the right things in place for those. And finally, then storage. Look at any storage incompatibilities that have jumped out from the SDS. So we have something should not be stored with oxidizers. Have we got oxidizers here? Yes. Is it been stored with? Yes, but okay, let's sort that out. So look at any major storage issues that are around. So essentially, before you go into the nitty-gritty, look to see, can you fix the really big problems that have been highlighted by kind of the snapshot you have by department. And finally then, and again, this is me go back to kind of my systems, in that, why do I, why do I feel the need to put this in as a slide even? Because in so many organizations I go in, I see COSH being done as a project. It is, this year we're going to sort out our COSH. It's our thing to do. We get our SDSs, we write our COSH estimates, the box is ticked. At the end of the year, the job is done, and nobody goes near it again for 4 or 5 years. So every part of it, and I'm only looking at the safe dashboard part here, but every part of it, you need to put support in place so that it's going to be kept up to date. So just for safe dashboard, new products. First of all, who's going to add to the inventory? So if we buy, yes, I go down now to the cleaning department, and Bob gives me an inventory. Thanks very much for that, Bob. But when a new product comes in, how is Bob going to let me know? Well, first of all, who's going to let me know? Is it Bob? Is it someone else? And how are they going to let me know? Is there essential inventory they're going to add it to? Are we using some software? Are they just going to send me an email? But nothing can happen. Absolutely nothing can happen with chemical safety if we don't know we have it. And again, I see people putting in complex systems for management of caution, 7 people are going to sign off on the COSH, but they have no system for who's going to tell us we have the product. So nothing can happen. And at least if we know we have the product, well, then the gap will be identified. We don't have a COSH assessment. We haven't reviewed the SDS. We don't have an SDS. But if we don't know we have the product, then it can't happen. So who's going to tell us when that new product comes into that department? And following from that, then who's going to get the SDS? Who's going to review the hazards? Ideally, everything above that line should be done before the product comes on site. In an ideal world, at the very least, we should be saying, okay, before a product comes in, what are the hazards of it? It's a carcinogen. Are we set up for deeming a carcinogen in that department? Yes or no? Well, then, if not, let's get the basic controls in place. But at the very least, just tell us you have it. If you don't know you have it, nothing can happen. And then for existing products, who's going to check for new versions of the SDS? Or if a new SDS is sent in by the manufacturer, which they should be doing anyway. If there's changes in the SDS, who's going to notify those out? Who's going to tell the department, etc., the different hazards that they have? So that's my kind of initial, my back to basics on chemicals. I hope it was useful to you guys, and any questions or anything like that, Melissa, I think you're going to go through them now.
Yes, thank you so much, Dermot. I know it's a bit of a feat to ask, I know these sessions can normally go on for like an hour or two, and you did a great job summarizing it down to 35 minutes. I just want to remind, before we get into the Q&As for this piece, remind everyone who's joined us that we actually have 2 presentations today, so you're getting 2 for 1. So we will be introducing the East Anglia Branch soon, and Kane will be talking about DSEAR. So please stay on the call for that. So one other thing I wanted to mention, just wanted to shout out Joanne Price, who is the former chair of the consultancy group. I know she's joined us today, so thank you. It's always good to get other leaders in the IOSH hemisphere joining our branch meetings. So great presentation, Dermot. A couple of good questions. Well, chats came up, conversations in the chat. I captured a few, so I'll just spend like about 4 or 5 minutes in the Q&A piece. There was something about, you mentioned MSDS and SDS. Why was the M dropped, I guess would be the basic question.
Why? That's quite a question. From my reading of it, so MSDS was never the correct term in Europe. It used to be the correct term in the United States, and they dropped the M off it when they started following the global harmonization. So it was an SDS always in Europe, but it was one of those things that everyone calls it MS. Most websites you go to, the link you follow is for MSDS. But the problem now is it just causes confusion. Why they dropped the M, I can't answer that really.
Okay. No, that's good. So some people had put in the chat a bit around the global harmonization piece, and so I know there was some questions, and because I think you may have used the word GHS, and a couple of people asked what was GHS. Do you want to speak on a bit on GHS?
Yeah. So essentially, what is GHS? So GHS stands for Global Harmonization. Why does that exist? And I give it as brief a summary as I can. So you guys would remember in the past, you had your old chip symbols, which were the old orange symbols with the black, the orange square with the black symbol that you see in your Tipex bottle, etc. So they were the symbols that were used in Europe. And there were different symbols used in the States, there were different symbols used in China, in India, etc. But as well as the symbols and the statements, what was also different is the actual calculation to say what was what. So, for example, in Europe, maybe, and I use the incorrect term, but but if this Pepsi burned through this metal within this depth of metal within X amount of time, it was corrosive. And if it took X amount of time less, it was an irritant. Whereas the standard in China was different. So basically, the calculation to decide what the classification was different, and the actual symbol. So basically, you could take a product in China that has maybe a blue diamond on it to say that it's corrosive. It may go to India. It might have to get a yellow circle on it to say it's an irritant. It would come to Europe and it would have an orange box on it, which would have the wheat symbol in that. And what global harmonization was essentially was to fix that. It's a global standard, and essentially says, okay, these are the standard pictograms we're going to use first. So all our labels will look the same. The standard hazard statements and the standard precaution statements, but also then in the background, the actual standard calculations. What do we decide? This is the test, or these are the limits for what is corrosive. And below that, then these are the limits then for what is an irritant, and below that then for what is non-hazardous. It's a global UN standard, and then there's regulations in different countries in that make it law. So it's within UK now it is GB REACH. Within Europe it is the old REACH. Within the States I think it's called HASCOM. I might probably get that wrong, but they're the local regulations. But essentially, GHS is the global standard that brought in those red pictograms that we see now on chemical products.
Excellent, thanks. This wasn't asked in the chat, so this is my question, and then I'll go to one that's on the chat. Is there a recommended review cycle for SDS?
And again, look, this is a very common question, and we often have it said to us, an SDS needs to be less than X amount of years, etc. And there is no standard for that. So there is no standard for if the regulations haven't changed, and if your product hasn't changed, then there is no need for you to update your SDS. So if the regulation hasn't changed in the last 5 years and you haven't changed any of your ingredients, then you don't need to update your SDS. But I would say most companies, just from a visuals point of view, so that it looks like they're more up to date, will at least review them once every maybe 2 years, and some more often. And it is just so that they can show that they are checking them, even though they legislative wise they don't have to. We often come up with crazy stuff from maybe some of the pharma would be one industry we often see it, where from a document management point of view, somebody decides that, well, we're not accepting any new products where the SDS is any more than 1 year old. It doesn't make any sense, and it can make difficult for people to bring in products because they're so big. Maybe they force the manufacturer to update something, but there is nothing in law anywhere to say it must be less than X amount of years if the regulations haven't changed. We would always recommend ourselves as a user of chemicals that you should, or as an employer, you should check at least once every 12 months with the manufacturer of the products, that you would go out every 12 months and you would check, is the SDS that I have still the most up-to-date one? If it is, great. If it's not, will we get the new one in and you archive that? So we would recommend that you check every 12 months. But the manufacturers themselves, usually every 2 years-ish, they will check, but there's nothing to say that they absolutely have to.
Okay, thanks. The last question I'll ask, and then I'm conscious of time for the next presentation. Someone wanted a clarification on the difference between SDS and CAS numbers.
Okay, SDS and CAS numbers. Okay, so a CAS number. So, okay, all the products that you look at, you go down to your local hardware shop and you look at, WD-40. WD-40 is not a pure substance. And essentially, all the pure substances that have all the pure substances that are in the world all have their own individual CAS number. And that's controlled by, there's a governing worldwide body that controls that. And when new substances are created, discovered, etc., they're given new CAS numbers. There are hundreds of thousands of them there, but they are unique to that substance. When you look at your likes of your WD-40, when you then go to section 3 of your safe data sheet, within that, in section 3 of your SDS, you will see then the list of CAS numbers, i.e. what are the substances that are in this product. So CAS numbers are for unique substances. They're the lowest level that you can go to the most basic level of our product that you can go to. And section 3 of your SDS will show you what are the substances, i.e. what are the substances and their CAS numbers that are contained within this product.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, we can go on for a while because it's such an important topic. We use chemicals everywhere, but I know you'll be available. Someone had asked for access to more presentations, etc. You've put your email address there, so hopefully you'll be okay for people to reach out, follow you on
100%.
LinkedIn, etc. I know you do a few presentations on this topic. So great. Thank you so much on behalf of the Chiltern and East Anglia Branch, Dermot, for participating in our summer school series on chemical safety. I now want to hand over to Angela.